Earlier this morning, Trump Press Secretary Karoline Leavitt hosted her latest disastrous White House press briefing, where, among other things, she defended Trump's ridiculous attacks on Taylor Swift, defended his dangerous attacks on Medicaid, pretended that he's somehow a beacon of physical health, but also, perhaps most noteworthy, actually contradicted him, humiliating him on the topic of tariffs. And I'm sure she's hoping nobody catches it. But we did, Karoline. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, as Mediaite is reporting, Karoline Leavitt claims China will pay the cost of tariffs, contradicting Trump, who said Walmart would. Interesting. The intrigue, and we have a lot to talk about the Walmart and Trump situation because it has gotten a lot worse. And but before we do that, let's talk about this press briefing. Okay, let's talk about Karoline Leavitt in particular contradicting Trump on who would foot the bill for these tariffs.
Children. Ouija.
Thank you, Karoline. President Trump and his top economic aides have repeatedly said that Americans will not pay the cost of tariffs. In fact, last week, Lutnick said people have to drop the, quote, silly arguments that consumers would pay the cost. But over the weekend, as you know, the president posted that Walmart should eat the tariffs and not charge the value customer anything. I'll be watching, and so will your customers. So does he acknowledge that if companies don't absorb the full cost, Americans will have to pay?
Well, first of all, the CEO of Walmart made those comments about the tariffs on an earnings call where CEOs, I believe, are legally obligated to give the most dire warnings and forecasts to their investors and stakeholders. The reality is the president has always maintained, Chinese producers will be absorbing the cost of these tariffs. And that is why China was so quick to hustle to the negotiating table with the United States of America. They need our markets, they need our consumers. And I would again point you to the inflation report that came out last week showing that inflation is declining in large part because energy prices are dropping across the board in this country because of the president's robust energy agenda that he has taken since January 20th. So the president is committed to ensuring that prices remain low for American consumers, and he maintains the position that foreign countries will absorb these tariffs.
But as the reporter pointed out, Trump actually didn't say that. I mean, Trump said a lot of things. Let's be clear, because he lies all the time and he's very inconsistent with his lies. But Trump says Walmart will be paying the price, not China, that Walmart, an American company, should be absorbing the cost of Trump's tariffs and not pass them on to the consumer. In other words, Trump has made it abundantly clear that unless Walmart chooses to fall on the proverbial sword and, basically absorb the cost of Trump's tariffs and eat into their profit margin, that it will inevitably go to the consumer. And Karoline Leavitt saying, no, it won't go to the consumer. It won't even go to Walmart. It's actually going to go to the Chinese importers, that China will pay the cost of the tariffs. Well, that's a total contradiction. You're contradicting the boss. Not a good look, right? But I don't know if it's a deliberate strategy on Karoline Leavitt's part. I suspect it's not the case. What I suspect is the narrative about the tariffs from the Trump administration is constantly changing, right? China's going to pay for it. Then occasionally Trump will say, okay, consumers will pay for it, but it's just for a little bit. It's just going to hurt a little bit. And then others say, well, it's going to be the companies absorbing it, and they just need to do their patriotic duty and absorb the costs. Because they're juggling so many balls in the air, it puts Karoline Leavitt in a tough spot, as smart as she is, to sell. Well, which lie are we telling at the moment? Is it China? Is it the company? So she got caught flat-footed and ultimately contradicted her boss on camera. Let's go to some other clips as well. Here's her talking about Trump still doubling down on the biggest mass deportation in American history.
These significant hirings will empower President Trump to continue delivering on his promise to carry out the largest mass deportation in the history of our country.
So in other words, Donald Trump, who ran on shrinking the government, is now saying, well, no, actually, we need to hire a bunch of people. We need to increase the size of the federal government in order to effectuate the biggest mass deportation event in American history, which is largely the product of Stephen Miller and Tom Homan's wet fever dream, right? They're desperate to evict immigrants from this country. And as we've been discussing on this channel, they've not been particularly precise. They violated due process, which is one of the reasons that Trump's immigration polls have suffered in virtually every poll as a consequence. Because even if in the abstract people oppose, undocumented immigration, illegal immigration. They want to secure the southern border. They loathe how Trump has done this. So Trump is violating not just due process, but also a campaign pledge to shrink the size of the government. So he's apparently doubling down on that. Then you have this, in the new media seat, you have another right-wing lunatic asking some really weird questions. And note Karoline Leavitt's reaction to some of this.
So over the weekend, President Trump posted Truth Social a video highlighting what most people call the Clinton body count, which is the strange number of suicides that seem to happen in Clinton circles. I have a headline here from the Washington Post that said, Trump peddles false conspiracy theories tying the Clintons to several deaths. So I just wanted to highlight real quick, this wasn't in Trump's video, but this is from the Arkansas Times, and it's the death of Mark Middleton, who was a former Clinton White House aide, who was found dead on a Clinton Foundation property. And I'll just quote from the Arkansas Times. Middleton apparently shot himself in the chest with a shotgun and also hung himself from a tree with an extension cord. So I have no idea how somebody commits suicide that way, but if the Washington Post is here, maybe you can enlighten us as to how that was actually a suicide. So anyways, that's just a lead into my question about the most famous Clinton-related suicide, which is that of Jeffrey Epstein. There's still a lot of questions around that case. You've released phase 1 of the Epstein files. What was missing from that is any connection to his ties to intelligence agencies, and that's really the whole story, that not just trafficking young girls, but doing it on behalf of intelligence agencies, and even potentially as part of a blackmail ring with potential ties to the Israeli government.
So what's interesting is he refers to Epstein as a Clinton-related suicide, but Jeffrey Epstein was dead, killed himself in federal custody when Donald Trump was president. So on Donald Trump's watch, under technically Donald Trump's protection, Jeffrey Epstein, who was a lifelong, or I shouldn't say lifelong, but for many, many years, a close friend of Donald Trump, killed himself. So you see how they're desperate to tie it to Hillary Clinton, who was not in power, Bill Clinton, who was not in power, under whose watch Jeffrey Epstein did not die. They're trying to absolve Trump of any sort of responsibility or association with Epstein, number one. Number two, note her reaction during that. She smirks and smiles, feeding this notion that somehow President Clinton or Hillary Clinton have been involved in a string of murders. Now, there's no evidence whatsoever that the person that this right-wing lunatic was referring to was murdered by the Clintons. And yes, the circumstances of his death are indeed bizarre. He shot himself in the chest, tied an extension cord around his neck first. When he shot himself in the chest, according to reports, it blew him off the bench, most likely speaking, causing the extension cord to hang him. I'm not sure why he did this elaborate thing, but even if, like Epstein, you find the circumstances of his death unusual, you actually need to provide evidence that it was the person that you just feel deep down is responsible for it. Otherwise, it sure sounds like a conspiracy theory and politically motivated at that. But again, this is who Karoline Leavitt chose to put in the White House press briefing room. Totally unhinged. Here's another clip.
I agree with Republicans behind this bill that Medicaid work requirements should be implemented as soon as 2026.
So the president wants to preserve and protect Medicaid for Americans who this program was intended for, the most vulnerable in our society, pregnant women, low-income families, seniors, those who truly need these benefits. And it should be going to people who physically cannot work. We want to see able-bodied Americans at least working 20 hours per week, whether that's part-time or full-time, whether that's even looking for work or volunteering for 20 hours a week.
So we'll get to the data in just a second, but I want to remind you that Donald Trump's big, beautiful reconciliation bill, it's proposing cuts to Medicaid, that the cuts that would be generated from this Republican legislation could be up to 14 million people kicked off Medicaid. And Trump insisted, under no circumstances would anybody be cut off Medicaid. Just find the waste, fraud, and abuse. Maybe you should actually produce evidence of the waste, fraud, and abuse and do it in a surgical way, rather than just promise $880 billion worth of blanket cuts to a program which, all things considered, is relatively efficient. As studies have indicated, KFF examines the intersection between Medicaid and work. Let's talk about this. Amid renewed interest in Medicaid work requirements as part of a broader legislative package designed to significantly reduce federal Medicaid spending, KFF has updated its analysis of the work status and demographic characteristics of Medicaid enrollees with the latest data. Data show that in 2023, 92% of Medicaid adults were either working full or part-time, 64%, or were not working due to barriers to work such as caregiving responsibilities, illness or disability, or school attendance, reasons that counted as qualifying exemptions from the work requirements under previous policies. This idea that, really just Medicaid is rife with abuse, people who are able-bodied and work. I mean, my God, it's just not a common thing. The data does not support it. And there's no evidence to support that there's $880 billion worth of that shit in Medicaid. None. They are working backwards from a particular policy goal. Well, shouldn't you actually just examine the policy first? Stunning stuff. Stunning stuff. The other clips as well. I mean, this one's unhinged. Trump attacked Taylor Swift again out of the blue over the weekend, the world's biggest pop star, for no damn reason. As far as I know, she hasn't been talking shit about him at concerts or anything else, and yet he attacked her on True Social, and Fox News' Peter Doocy asked Karoline Leavitt about this. Excuse me.
What does President Trump mean when he says that Taylor Swift is no longer hot?
Look, he is speaking about Taylor Swift's political views and how perhaps it has impacted the support of the American public for her work, and I will leave it at that. Annie, go.
What?
Why not just say that? And also, why are you saying that in the first place? It's so strange. I mean, it'd be like Joe Biden or Barack Obama picking on Kid Rock. Kid Rock ain't hot anymore. He's a MAGA celebrity. He's a MAGA, Trump supporter who also happens to be a singer. Should Democrats be picking? I mean, he's a fraction of the significance and success of Taylor Swift. How would you feel if Democratic politicians were? I mean, it's unhinged stuff. Like, he's got better things to do with his time, and yet she's defending him. In another interaction with Peter Doocy, she talks about Trump's health.
Follow up on former President Biden. White House doctors may have missed the early stages of his prostate cancer. So is President Trump worried about the quality of care that presidents get here?
Not as far as President Trump is concerned. The White House physician we have here is phenomenal, and the team of physicians that take care of the president, particularly at Walter Reed Medical Center, are great. The president had his physical recently, as you know. He had perfect results. He's in very good shape. I think those of you who traveled to the Middle East with us last...
Did you catch Peter Doocy's reaction there? One more time.
Perfect results. He's in very good shape. I think those of you who...
He's like, Karoline, come on. It's not perfect results. It's not perfect shape. It's not very good shape. He's not in great shape. Now, President Biden was diagnosed with aggressive prostate cancer. I mentioned that in the one time I looked at my phone for like politics stuff. I was trying to be good because I knew I'd drive myself insane if I kept abreast of what's going on in politics while I was out of state over the weekend. Yeah, President Biden's been diagnosed. It was reported a couple of weeks ago that he was being examined for like a polyp or a nodule. And I guess it was tested. It was hormone tested, and he has an aggressive form of prostate cancer that they believe has metastasized to the bones. It's not good. It's not good at all. I'm waiting for more information about what the prognosis and everything is before I talk about it at great length. But suffice it to say, with all the other conversations about Biden at the moment, it is generating a lot of attention, and we may look into MAGA's response to this. But that's the predicate for Peter Doocy's question. One last clip here, okay, on the topic of something we discussed in a previous video, which is Deputy White House Chief of Staff Stephen Miller's ominous proclamation that Trump is considering suspending the writ of habeas corpus, which is your constitutional right to challenge your arrest or your detainment by the government in court. Like, oh my God, they arrested me for no reason. I want to know what the charges are. Is this valid? Is this lawful? It's been suspended like once or twice, maybe 3 times in U.S. history, and very selectively at that. The biggest example is President Abraham Lincoln suspending it during the Civil War, and Congress backed it up. Stephen Miller said a week or two ago that, Trump is looking at unilaterally overturning it. Well, Karoline Leavitt weighs in on that.
Just one other question. Recently, Stephen Miller at the White House made some comments about considering suspending habeas corpus. And I'm curious if there's any update on how the White House is exploring that option to enact the president's agenda.
I don't have any update at this time, but I can check in with our Deputy Chief of Staff.
That's really ominous. Like, hey, listen, the Deputy White House Chief of Staff, who credible reporting indicates might as well be the actual chief of staff. I mean, who's puppeteering things. He says that yeah, you guys might like do away with this, arguably the single most important constitutional right, certainly one of like top three, unilaterally. You got any update for it? I don't know. I'll check in with him. I mean, again, imagine how right-wing media would react if President Obama or President Biden said something similar. I mean, we'd all be freaking out, myself included, like, no, that's not how it works. Congress can suspend the writ of habeas corpus and only in an emergency. And that's not something we want any president, Democrat or Republican, to be able to do on a whim, as Trump is asserting here. So very ominous stuff. Again, another disastrous press briefing by Karoline Leavitt, contradicting Trump, defending Trump on the most ridiculous things, from Medicaid to Taylor Swift to his own personal health. And again, ominously noting like, I gotta get back to you on whether or not we're going to take away your right to know why we're just rounding you up and arresting you. I'll get back to you. Maybe. In the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.